Well, thank you everybody for joining us today for our industry update. As always, please mute your lines. We will be recording this and sending it out at the end. So everybody that's signed up will get a copy and it'll be up on our website. And please use the chat feature for questions at the end of the presentation. And with that, I will kick it off to you, John.
Thank you, Hope, and welcome everyone to another weekly update presented largely by Melissa Bova. Melissa, thanks for all the good work that you do in all the time and also getting ready for the webinar each week. As a reminder, this webinar is designed for the use information and intended for the PRLA constituents, which includes restaurants, hotels, travel and tourism partners, destination marketing organizations, and any other friends of PRLA. It is off the record. It's not a press webinar. We're happy to entertain any and all press inquiries as they arrive. But if you're with the press today, please disconnect and call us separately. Today's webinar is sponsored by Food Shelter, which is a communications agency supporting and elevating the hospitality and real estate industries. Food and shelter are fundamental elements to thrive. Food Shelter surpasses fundamentals and helps businesses thrive in the marketplace. Through candid counsel, creative perspectives, news, images, anecdotes, and experiences, Food Shelter creates engaging, measurable campaigns to reach targeted audiences and communities in unexpected ways. Food Shelter is a partner with PRLA, leading media relations and crisis communications on behalf of the hospitality industry. Food Shelter has been feeding minds and building brands since 2005. Thank you, Food Shelter, for supporting this webinar and for the terrific work you do for PRLA, particularly during the pandemic, but all the time. And with that, Melissa, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, John. It isn't really a slow week, but it's probably a little bit slow in terms of new updates. So hopefully we will not go over an hour today. But of course that depends on questions from all of you. I know a few of you on this call. I am about 70 emails behind in terms of catch up because we're doing so much in terms of grassroots. So I apologize if you've sent me an email or left me a voice message. I just want to apologize now. I will get back to you, but if you saw my schedule today, you would shudder. But I will get back to you. Just give me a little bit of time to weed through everything that's in my inbox. With that, let's talk about federal. And I didn't print out the PowerPoint in advance. So while I put it together, I tend to forget what I put in here. So we'll just be on an adventure to see whatever the next slide says. So last week, I was super not optimistic. And this week, I'm still pretty not optimistic, but not as bad as I was last week in terms of a recovery package. As you all know, I told you last week, the president announced that he was done negotiating on the next recovery package for the industry. A few hours later, I would presume after his own party said, you can't say that, he tried to reopen negotiations, and it has continued to be a back and forth ever since, which has been really the case for the past few months in terms of trying to come up with another COVID package. As every day goes by, it does feel less and less likely that we are going to see the $1.8, $2 trillion packages, $3 trillion packages that were being discussed before. I don't want to say that there's no chance because I'm trying to be optimistic. And I think we have a lot of people in Congress that would like to see a package passed before they go home officially to get through the last weeks before the election. But it does seem less and less likely. And of course, what we're seeing is even if the president and the House can come up with an agreement, which so far they haven't, the Senate is so focused on confirming a Supreme Court justice that it feels like all of the energy has been sucked out of the room, and we seem to be a consequence of that. At minimum, the fight continues for another round of P3. And I know there has been a little bit of miscommunication on this front. There does need to be legislation passed to allow for a second drawdown. So while there are funds still in the P3 from the last CARES package or the supplemental package that was passed that haven't been drawn down upon, they need to authorize a second drawdown. So that does need to be done via legislation through Congress. And at minimum, the hope is that a deal can be struck to allow for that. to help get you through the winter months. If a deal is not struck, the thought in terms of what we're hearing from our national associations is that we might not have a recovery package again until January when they return to a new session. And of course, we don't know what that session or that Congress is going to look like. So I'm not saying that there isn't going to be a deal, but with every day that passes, it does become less and less likely that we will get one. But of course, as you all know, as you're receiving grassroots information from our national organizations, please engage when you are asked to. Oh, thanks, Hope. Hope brought me my PowerPoint. It's good to be in the office. But please stay tuned to that. If we think there's an opportunity, we're going to run with it because winter is coming. I know, Game of Thrones again. And we all know that 8 weeks of PPP does nothing when you've been shut down for going on 7 months. To that end, Treasury is working through changing some of the rules and regulations as it pertains to loan forgiveness. So this week, there was some information put out that was in our update. That means if you received a P3 for less than $50,000, it's going to be forgiven very quickly and efficiently without all of the extra information that you will need to provide if you obtain a larger loan. So of course, you do not need to apply for forgiveness right now. You have until the end of the year. The hope is that they will continue to streamline the forgiveness as they realize how many businesses have drawn down on the P3 and how that will have to be handled. But they have streamlined the forgiveness document if you do have a P3 loan of less than $50,000. If you used the majority of your P3 for wages and salaries for your employees, you're pretty much guaranteed full forgiveness of the loan. It's more or less the proof that you need to offer for the other uses that they're still trying to work through. So if you haven't applied yet, you're below 50, it's a lot cleaner than it was before. If you're above 50, you might want to wait a little bit in hopes that they continue to streamline the process moving forward. And of course, as we said, we're going to try and continue to fight for at minimum another P3 for the industry. Fortunately, that's all I have federally, because unless you are going to be on the Supreme Court, there's really not much else happening in the news on that front. Okay, House Bill 2513. I will not make you play another drinking game because I think some of you were half lit if you were playing when we did this last week. House Bill 2513 is on the governor's desk as we expected, and as is continuing. It's been on his desk since last week, since last Tuesday. And he is going to wait the full 10 days, as we're seeing so far, to veto, sign, or let the bill become law. As a reminder, House Bill 2513 is, top priority number one, how we're going to try and survive this winter. This is our focus right now. It returns us to 50%. We can't be reduced below 50%. That's key. So you wouldn't be able to reduce to 25% occupancy if House Bill 2513, if we can get a veto override on it. It brings events to 50%. Currently, events are at 20% or 15%, depending on whether it's indoors or outdoors. Your indoors events would be brought back to 50%. It brings back bar seating. Operating at 50% capacity doesn't mean a lot to a lot of you if you don't have bar seating, and it eliminates that meal requirement, since we all seem to have learned that if you get some chicken fingers, you're not going to get COVID. This bill is the only way that we can see right now, based on the events announcement last week from the governor, based on what we're seeing coming out of his office, the only thing that we see that is going to help our industry get back to some sort of normalcy. As I said, it is on his desk right now. He has until the 16th to make a decision. I have confirmed today that the House is planning an override vote if he vetoes it, which he said he would. That override vote is going to be Monday, the 19th. So we have started, it was in our daily update yesterday, we have started the grassroots and a social media campaign to urge legislators to stick with us as it comes to a veto override vote of 2513. This is, we're targeting, obviously we want everybody to vote with us. I think the Republicans are with us, but we also included yesterday social media handles for all 36 Democrats that voted yes on 2513. I'm not holding my breath that we're going to flip anybody who voted no, that they're going to vote with us on an override vote, which is why we're focusing on those 36 people that voted on the bill. That's inclusive of our good Democratic friends who voted with us here and also voted to override the sports bill. And it is inclusive, especially of what I fondly refer to as our flippers, those that voted for the sports bill and then flipped on that veto override vote. This is our chance. If we do not hold firm and get 135 votes for a veto override on Monday the 19th, we will not have another crack at this until maybe after the election, and probably not even then. I can't tell you how important it is and that you outreach, you use your social media, even if you don't want to use your business page, if that's a concern for you, which I think 2513 is pretty bipartisan, but if that's a concern, just getting it on your private pages and getting the word out. That social media message is going to spread, and that is going to be our focus. And that should not be in lieu of sending emails and making phone calls. You need to do all of the above. So please pay attention to that. I have started sending individual notes for those of you that might be in the district of somebody who is that we're focusing on, those 36 Democrats. Doesn't mean that all of you are going to get it, because our database only pulls one name from each business. So you might be receiving our emails, but it might not be a communication you get from me. So please start that outreach on your own. If you get an email from me, everything that's in that email is not any different than what was in our daily update yesterday. These next 4 days are going to be really key in terms of getting support for that bill. So please do that outreach. Concerns, what's keeping me up at night? I'm going to give you an idea of what we're hearing from some of the Democrats that are worried about putting up an override vote. One, of course, is an increase in case counts. Our case counts are higher. That can be rebutted quite easily by saying that actually our percentage of positive cases is down. The reason our case counts are up is because we're doing more testing than we ever had before. So you can look at that number, that 13, 14, 1,500 cases a day that we've seen over the past few days. But when you compare it to the number of actual tests that are being given, our positivity rate is actually below where it was over the past few months, and especially in March and April when the initial shutdown occurred. 2, there is a desire to allow the governor to still have unilateral control to shut us down if he needs to. Quite honestly, I think I can speak for all of us that we're a little sick and tired of unilateral control, especially when we've been the target of such unilateral control and we have suffered because of it. House Bill 2513 is reasonable. It still ensures social distancing and barriers, the only things that COVID knows. It doesn't know 25%, 10%, 15, 20. So it still allows all of those safety precautions to be in place, but ensures that we cannot be the target of mitigation when we are not the cause of an increase in cases. 3, this came up on a call we had previously. There is a desire as our friends that don't want to put up an override vote to say, we know you need grant funds, you need money to survive. So if you can't operate normally, we need to get those funds to you. There is a proposal for $100 million for this industry. I think we are all well aware that $100 million for 26,000 restaurants and hotels in this state is not going to go very far. And I have said to them, if you want to talk about, in lieu of letting us reopen, give us some funds, we're talking a $6 billion grant program, which isn't feasible. So a grant program isn't going to save this industry, and to say that that is going to help is not fair, and certainly is not going to get you all through the winter. So those are some of the things that we're hearing. My concern right now, despite the fact that the positivity rates are down, the numbers are high, they look high. And that's a really fun talking point that people like to run with. So those are the things that are keeping me up at night. So that's why it is important that you focus on the talking points that Ben put up with our action alert, and also talk about, especially for my hotels, my caterers, my event centers. People think that the announcement last week from the governor helped you. I think we've all learned that for many of you, it moved you backwards, or certainly didn't get you to a place that you can survive. And that's important to rebut, that the movement that they're taking, the steps that they're taking are not enough. It's not going to help, and we need the legislature to step in. So that's my 2513 long pitch of the day. And of course, as you're hearing from people, if you're getting pushback, if one of those 36 Democrats that we've shared with you seem to be waffling, seem to be voicing concern, please let me know as well. We can also work on applying pressure from Harrisburg too. Session insights, I expect next week's session to be a cleanup before the election. We do anticipate that they'll come back in November. As of right now, October 14th. But it depends honestly how the election goes, which will determine how much they'll do in November. So really next week, 2513 is our focus. We'll be looking at grant programs. We still have $1 billion in that CARES Act funding that they need to spend before the end of the year. They will need to spend it, and we continue to push what we're calling that entirety of the hospitality and tourism package, which would be a grant program inclusive of restaurants, hotels, tourism attractions, and destination marketing organization. So those are what we are pushing for when we start to look at grant programs. But for right now, this is going, people want to wrap things up. They want to go home. They want to campaign for re-election, which is why it's really important that you're all doing this outreach to make sure these legislators know that we're watching them. And this vote next week is something that our industry is going to watch very carefully and respond to very carefully. Next slide. So this is what was in the daily update yesterday. Huge props to Steph Otterson, our communications director, and Kendra Hepler. To be honest, those of you that know me, I am the very least technology savvy person possibly within the entirety of PRLA. So I had called Steph literally 2 days ago and said, help. How can we get graphics for people to put on social and use? And she and Kendra came up with this, and they even explained it in a way that I can't screw it up. So these were in the daily update yesterday. I believe we've also included a link as well. Please download these images, throw them up on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We've provided social media handles for, like I said, those 36 Democrats we're focusing on. You can send it to Republicans too. It doesn't hurt to make sure that people know this is a top priority. But please start putting this on social. In addition, like I said, to those phone calls and emails, which you need to do, #1 priority is spreading the word via social media as well. And as Steph so eloquently said, we like that Kendra did green because it means go, which means 2513 should get the veto override. But these are just some really great pieces that you can use and feel free to use. Now, if you're not specifically a restaurant, you can change that social message and say, thank you for standing with caterers. Thank you for standing with hotels. Thank you for standing with the hospitality industry. Obviously, we have restaurants there because that's the gist of what the bill would change, but it certainly impacts all of you. So please feel free to tweak that message depending on what your business is. But this is, if you don't do anything else for the next 5-6 days, please get these up on social and make those calls and send those emails. So we have some local updates. It was actually pretty nice for a few months when we didn't have local updates, but here we are back with Philadelphia and Allegheny County getting a little rowdy. Allegheny County, there is a hearing tomorrow. I've talked about this in the past regarding a paid sick leave legislation that would be identical to what the city of Pittsburgh passed. There's a move to pass something similar in Allegheny County. Certainly a conversation PRLA is willing to have. As you know, we did file a lawsuit against Pittsburgh. We lost that. Don't have a lot of lawsuit luck, it seems. But Allegheny County is looking to do something similar. I did testify before this, the Allegheny County Health and Human Services Committee in June, and said, happy to have this conversation, but our entire industry is wrecked, and maybe now isn't the time to pass a mandate on them. And I will continue that messaging when I testify tomorrow. I think paid sick leave is important. I think it's a discussion worthy of having. I don't think it's a discussion to be had when all of you have employees that aren't even working or you're closing down permanently. So that is what I will be testifying to tomorrow before Allegheny County Council. In Philadelphia, if you are a hotel in Philadelphia, your life just got a lot harder. There are a series of bills that we've been waiting for that have been filed in Philadelphia City Council, that will be filed in City Council, relating to the requirement that you need to hire back your laid off employees before you hire anybody else. So really kind of redirecting how you rehire during the COVID process. So that legislation is something that we'll be working through with City Council. It's expected to be filed, 3 bills to be filed on Thursday. and we'll be updating all of you on that as we work through that. We are partnering with the Greater Philadelphia Hotel Association on that in terms of trying to get ahead of it. So thanks to them for always being a solid partner of PRLA. And since they are the Philadelphia specific association, PRLA will do everything we can to assist them as it pertains to those pieces of legislation. We're filing 2 bills in Philadelphia on behalf of the industry, just as an FYI. Might be filed as early as this week, maybe next week. We're hearing from a lot of you about your commercial leases. There is a lot of protections for residential leases, but a lot of you are in commercial leases, and quite honestly, you can't afford to pay them. And landlords that might have been a little bit more lenient in March and April and May are not right now. So we're looking at legislation to allow for commercial rent protection, also for delaying your use and occupancy payments. I think it's written up to a year to allow you a little bit of relief to try and catch up and get through this crisis. So we're continuing to have those conversations in Philadelphia, also at the state level, but sometimes things happen a little bit more quickly in Philadelphia. So we're hoping to have those conversations and try and get some pieces of legislation passed to help all of you in Philadelphia through the winter. Let's see. So mitigation updates and where we are on that front, and then we'll get through to questions. Certification, they are, if you have not had, as I said this before, an LCE agent or an ag person from Department of Ag come into your business since the self-certification enforcement has began, you are one of the very few. I know they said that they would not increase enforcement, but we're certainly seeing a lot more stop-ins and checking in terms of COVID requirements at our restaurants across the state. You will get dinged if you are operating at 50% and you didn't certify. I know it is stupid. I know you shouldn't have to. There's not much we can do about it. So please certify if you're operating at 50% and you haven't yet. You might get a warning the first time. You will get fined the second time. And you also have the potential of, if you're operating at 50% and you haven't certified, that they will reduce you to 25% for the foreseeable future. As I said, enforcement is still predominantly warnings for the first time around, but they are making the rounds. There are checklists being used by the Department of Ag and LCE to determine that you are meeting all of the requirements. No bar seating, meal requirement, social distancing, 50% capacity. All of those items are being checked pretty regularly by those entities. Next steps, as I said, 2513 again. We should know where we stand on that for next week. And we certainly hope the governor is having a press conference at 11:30 today. We are not expecting any major announcements, but of course, as case counts increase, this is what makes our efforts to get 2513 passed even more important, because it does seem that whether there is logic or reason behind it or not, we continue to be the target of mitigation in the state of Pennsylvania. We do have some updates to the FAQ in terms of the announcement that we got last week, which was that 14-page document. And I warned you all last week, if you print it or you send it out, make sure you get ready to throw it in the recycling bin, because they did update it again on, I want to say it was Thursday or Friday, wherever it was, they did update it again. And some things were added or clarified as part of that. So we had talked to the administration and we made it very clear, and many of you are feeling this pain point, that when you do 20% indoor for an event, there are restaurants that before, under the administration's guidance and their logic, could safely have an event for 25 people indoors, and COVID was not a problem. Under this new 20% mitigation, that is reduced for a lot of you. So if you're a 75-person restaurant, your private events just went down to 15 people, inclusive of staff. We requested the administration to consider allowing 25 to kind of continue to be the standard, and they said no thank you, and reiterated that in the updated guidance that they put out. So they are not budging as it pertains to that 20% number. So if it brings you below 25 people, they don't seem to be caring about that. Great talking point for 2513 is to talk about that before you could safely do 25, now you're even less than where you were before. And the holiday season is coming. This is not a good time for them to be reducing what was already a very low number to begin with. They did clarify, I don't think I have any giant venues on this, but because this formula is such a special piece of accounting, if you are a larger venue or if you're above that certain square footage or that certain capacity and you are subject to 15% instead of 20, you can use the higher number. So in that scenario, they're letting you use the higher number, but that's really only going to apply if you're in a stadium or one of those really large events, which I don't think a lot of people on this call fall into those boxes. Second, the list that they clarified was, and you've heard me say this before, I know that everybody's doing the best they can, but we literally have 6 different departments that are doing guidance. And sometimes one piece of guidance says one thing, another says something else, but then it's not, they don't jive. So the administration has pulled over that guest list requirement that was on the governor's operations FAQ, not even an FAQ guidance, and pulled it over to the mitigation requirements. So if you are having a private event, you do still need to keep that guest list of everybody in attendance and where they're going to be in 14 days. So that still needs to be maintained, and that has been clarified in the FAQ document. For tents, for the outdoor piece, this was what was causing a lot of us some stress last week, were the parameters of the tent under the mystery calculation. That a lot of you that could safely have 150 people in a tent were actually reduced to 40 or 50 people under this new calculation. The administration has since updated their guidance to say that you can use the entirety of the space of which the tent is sitting. So if it is in a field, if it is outside your venue, if it is in a parking lot, you can use the entirety of the outdoor space to determine the capacity. You still have to have social distancing, but you're not subject to basically the 4 walls or the 3 walls of the tent. So that was clarified as well in the updated document. I don't know if we're going to get more updates from the administration this week. I don't think that we will. They usually have been happening at the beginning of the week, but that is where we are in terms of that mitigation FAQ. And there have been other things updated. I'm not going to go through it all. If I get any specific questions, we can go over all of that. But those are some of the things that were clarified since the webinar last week. I think, oh yeah. Forgot about the locals. Allegheny County has aligned with the state. So the state guidance is now the Allegheny County guidance, which is a nice change for those of you in Allegheny County, even though the guidance is still somewhat not great. Allegheny County is aligned. So Philadelphia, actually there's a typo on there. So I'll get to that. So don't read what's on the screen, it's wrong. So you know how like the event guidance came out from the state last week and we're like, this is terrible. Like this doesn't help us. And how can it get any worse? And then yesterday, Philadelphia said, here, hold my beer. And Philadelphia came out with their guidance, which literally is about as impossible as it can be. So Philadelphia announced yesterday, beginning this Friday, that indoor capacity is going to operate at 10%, not 20. So it says 20, it's 10. They again are also not included, and they have a whole cap of indoors at 250 people. So it doesn't even matter if you are the Pennsylvania Convention Center, you can only have 250 people in that space. And then the 10%, of course, if you're a restaurant or if it's a ballroom, even within a hotel, your 150 person ballroom you can now have 15 people in it. So for a lot of you, again, you took a step backwards from that 25 to this new 10% number. The Commissioner Farley very specifically blamed weddings, funerals, and bridal showers as for the spread of COVID, whether that's true or not. They are keeping indoors at 10% with a maximum of 250 people, no matter what. Outdoors, depending on the size of the venue and the capacity, you're at that 15% number with your 7,500 people maximum. So outdoors, the flow of air, it's more lenient, but Philadelphia really did just again, like said, hold my beer, and came out with a 10% indoor capacity number. And again, that is effective October 16th. We are hearing from a few other counties. I think Montco is the only one that I feel I haven't quite figured out yet. Montgomery County does have a permit in place of if you want to have more than 25 people indoors or 250 outdoors, you need to apply for a permit to prove that you are taking COVID responsibility and doing extra things to protect from COVID. But the conundrum with that is, of course, under the guidance, there are some of you that couldn't have 25 people. So that will still be in effect. So even if Montgomery County is saying more than 25, you need to get a permit. If you are, again, a 75-person restaurant in Montgomery County, you would still only be able to have 15 people under the governor's guidance. Montco is the only one, I think, that still has the 25, 250 in place. If there are other counties out there, that's fine. But as we've said before, the more restrictive is what you need to follow. So if the governor's guidance is more restrictive than the county, you need to follow the governor's guidance. And then, of course, in places like Philadelphia, that's more restrictive. So you need to follow their guidance. And I feel like I'm at the end. Yes, I'm going to catch my breath.
Great job, Melissa. So we do have some webinars coming up. Again, Melissa will be back next week. Tomorrow, though, the Philadelphia city officials will be hosting a webinar. We do have the link up on our website. The goal of the session is to ensure that you understand the city's winterization guidelines. The link, you do not have to pre-register. The link is live. So when you go over there tomorrow at 3:30, you could just click it and you'll go straight into the webinar. RSI will be back next week. They actually have two webinars, one on the 20th and one on the 22nd. The same webinar, though, it will be about cost of goods, outlining the whys and the best practices of understanding the properly accounting for cost of goods. So they did a great job last week. It was about a half-hour webinar with some Q&A. So I think if you have the time, please take the time to join us. Next, on the 26th and the 29th, we do have some webinars coming up. 26th will be a panel discussion. It'll be Philly-based, so please join us with that. I think Ben will be on it, and we'll have some legislators on it and some other individuals in the state to talk about the community and sustainability in that area. And then on the 29th, we'll be having a group come on to do a Ask the Experts on social distancing and barriers, and talking a little bit about the barriers and guards that are available. And, if you have any questions on how installation works or what to think about, they'll be there to walk you through the whole process. And then next slide, Eric. Again, we have the training solutions that are always available. The links are up on our website for COVID training and for ServeSafe. We will be sending out some more details on virtual experiences on what we're looking for specifically. So if you did sign up, please check your email. I'll be sending that out this week. And we are going to be doing some career profiles again, so I'll be reaching out to individuals about that too. And the scholarships are open, so if you know of anybody that's looking for money for school next year, please refer them to our website. And with that, I think we are on to questions. And I think, Melissa, you have a hard stop at noon, right? So
Yes, I have a hard stop.
Pre-warn everybody.
We have 27 minutes, so I think because we haven't had any overwhelming announcements this week, we might be done before noon, which would be nice. And I still keep on laughing at the number of Heidi Howards on this call. It's making my entire day. So thank you. Are there any specific requirements that apply to barriers? Example is the plexiglass barriers between booths. So this is where Philadelphia is different from the state, and I'm not drawing attention to it because Philadelphia is doing its own checking of this. But in Pennsylvania, I'm going to read it directly from this. You can only have barriers between booths that are back to back. The guidance is unchanged on that front. If the governor's office will have a call with PRLA where I can start talking about winterization and other things they should change, it's something I plan on bringing up to them. We have not had that call as of yet. But as it pertains to the requirements for the between booths, there is no mandatory standard regarding the height requirement, though we joke that it has to be as high as a tall person when they're seated. So we're still waiting for John Longstreet's height when he's seated in a booth, because we think that's probably a good number to use in terms of height. The goal for the barriers is to prevent respiratory droplets from passing from one booth to another. Depending upon the height of the back of the booth itself, the height of the plexiglass partition could vary. Some booths with very high backs may fully separate patrons, so you don't have to do anything. Booths with shoulder high backs, low enough to expose the back of an adult's head or permit a toddler standing on the bench to reach into the neighboring booth. I can vouch, I have some nieces that do that. Might be served well with a 24, 30, or 36-inch plexiglass or other physical barrier. So that's your standards for your barriers with your booths. I know some booths are very high and actually higher than a person's head, and then you don't need a barrier in that scenario. But if it is a lower backed booth, you do need a barrier. Let's see. Do you have any insight in the COVID-19 PA statewide SBA assistance grant program? Round 1 was completed right on schedule, and round 2 has gone well beyond their standard stated timeline for announcements. I think that is announced last week for $94 million. I think they did announce the grant recipients last week for the second round, but we can double check that because there are a lot of grant programs floating around. But I think the state one, they did announce last week at the Broad Street Market, actually. For the grant program for hospitality industry, is there any way to advocate for flexibility in how those funds can be spent by a business? We need to have flexibility in using the funds for any legitimate business expense, not just for mortgage, leases, utilities, and wages. I mean, we do have in the grant program that we did for the restaurant specifically, we also included the purchase of raw materials to operate your business. That was part of it. But we do have to be a little bit careful because there are restrictions in terms of the CARES funds and how that can be spent. So there are parameters that are going to have to be put in place no matter what in terms of the use of the funds to align with the federal guidance of what they can be spent on. I do think that it's pretty broad. I'm not sure what other use of the funds you all might have other than raw materials, mortgages, leases, utilities, and wages. But if there are ones that I'm missing, we also have one that does allow for PPE. That would be included as well. Just want to make sure that none of the announcements from yesterday affect 50% indoor dining. No, there's been no change to indoor dining. But of course, there is the change as it pertains to private events in Philadelphia. So even though your restaurant can operate at 50% capacity when serving the public, if you're having a private event, you can't have a private event for more than 10% of your capacity. And then you can seat the remaining 40% in as part of your regular restaurant. But in Philadelphia, your private events are going to be restricted to that 10% number, including staff, which is atrocious. We received information from the Valley Forge Convention and Visitors Bureau that sounded like Montgomery County was still using the earlier indoor guidance of 25 people versus 20% capacity. Do you have any info on Montco differing from the governor's latest guidance? I think I did cover that. So, and like I said, I know Montco put out that guidance before we got the updated guidance from the governor. So that might change. Montco, I think today or tomorrow, updates their guidance. So there might be a change there. I'm just saying in terms of LCE enforcement, LCE is going to be looking at the 20%. So if your 20% is less than 25, I don't think you're going to get shut down for it, but you might get warned on that front. And then we have the grant award list. Wow, is there no other questions? Is everybody feeling okay? Or did I do that great of a job? Oh, here we go. Based on Philadelphia's event gathering announcement yesterday, the 10% capacity takes precedence in divisible rooms, separate floors and buildings. To be clear, a 30,000 square foot ballroom can max at 250 people versus 300. Yes, Philadelphia is a hard max at 250. So even if you can accommodate more than 250 in your space, you cannot have more than 250 in an indoor space. I know. And I'm exhausted too. It's funny, we haven't had any major announcements, and I think I'm more tired this week than I was the past few weeks. Man, you guys, what are you going to do with this 20 minutes you're getting back? If you have 3 spaces, can you have 250 in each of the spaces? If you have spaces that accommodate, I forget what the, if you have a 30,000 square foot ballrooms, yes, you can in that scenario, but they can't intermingle, so they have to be separate spaces. And here's a question. If a business is using a tent for regular outdoor dining, the new amount calculation does not apply, correct? Right? Yes, that is correct. So it's only the private events. So if you have a tent in your parking lot, you have a tent outside, you're serving diners, you have your heat lamps up, God bless you because you found them, that is 50%. That's your social distancing. That's your standard for outdoor dining. I love all the Heidi Howards that are saying thank you. Heidi, you really appreciate me. Is self-serve buffet still a no-go? I just had, actually self-serve buffets are permitted. They're not highly recommended in terms of safety, but there is no ban on self-serve buffets. Now we are seeing some people have staff serve from the buffets. You need to have your sneeze guard in place. There are parameters that are in place, but self-serve buffets have actually been permitted since you've gone to green. That hasn't changed, but don't say that too loudly because I don't want to give them any ideas. Well, with my 18 minutes remaining, I'll try to reply to some of your emails that I haven't responded to.
Thank you, Melissa. Great job.
We do have the 11 p.m. no alcohol will end anytime soon. I'm not holding my breath. I think it's shenanigans that they did it in the first place, since apparently we could operate in yellow and green till 2 o'clock in the morning. And then all of a sudden now we can't operate past 11. We're going to push on it. I think we'll get bar seating back before we'll get 11 p.m., but that's just me speculating. Okay, I want to get off before I get another.
Yeah, I was going to say, thank you everybody for joining us today. We do have this recorded. We will be sending out, our daily update today with any updates that we hear the rest of the afternoon. And again, and also if anybody wants to know what the COVID inspection, we do have a copy of that we could send out. So if you wanted to see what they were asking, we do have a copy of that from Department of Ag. And with that, thank you everybody. Everybody stay safe and have a good rest of the week.